All right. Well, I guess we'll get started. We have attorney Manny, or Manuel. Very nice to meet you. If you could introduce yourself,
Likewise.
we'd love to learn more about you.
Sure. Emmanuel Gonzalez. I'm an immigration attorney. My office is in the North Shore of Massachusetts, and I'm a solo practitioner as well as good friend with Yolanda. And, we are just living exciting times, and I'm glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
No, thank you, attorney Manny, for being here with us. And we also have our very own attorney Yolanda Mendoza. I'm gonna give it over to her so she can introduce herself.
A lot of you know me already, but I'm Yolanda Mendoza. So I am a first generation immigrant from the Dominican Republic, as is my colleague Manny. We actually went to law school together in Boston. That is where we met. And I'm just so fortunate to have him as a colleague, especially during these very volatile times. But I've been practicing immigration law for upwards of 17 years in some capacity. I started as an immigration paralegal and then worked as an associate for two small firms and then opened up my own practice here in Miami. So really excited that I can represent the community here in South Florida, as well as all of the United States.
Wonderful. So there you have it. Now, we have attorney Yolanda and Manny here to really inform us and keep us updated on immigration policies and what is going on in the United States. We have a few topics of interest here. First of all, I see here Ron DeSantis plans to substitute foreign workers. There was a proposal made in which, in the state of Florida, the Senate committee discussed there were plans, and Governor Ron DeSantis proposed that a younger workforce could be part of the solution to replace the non-citizens that were working in the state of Florida. So how many younger workers are actually going to be willing to take on these jobs, do you think?
That's an interesting question. I don't think many of them will. And just to discuss what this proposal actually would mean. So currently in Florida, children that are under the age of 16 cannot be employed, or that's considered unlawful child labor. He wants to change that so that children ages 14 can begin to work. And also, he wants to eliminate the time restrictions, right? So the current time restrictions are that if you are 16 age or older, you can only work after 8:30 a.m. and can't work after 11 p.m. He wants to eliminate this restriction for child labor, okay? So the level of delusion and just how out of touch with reality these politicians are is what is truly alarming here, right? When we're talking about replacing dirt, cheap labor, we're not talking about replacing popcorn poppers at the movie theater or, parking cars at a golf course. We're talking about construction work, right? Cleaning out sewers, cleaning out bathrooms, harvesting vegetables and crops in the field, and sometimes hazardous conditions, right? These are not jobs that 14 and 15-year-olds are qualified to do or going to undertake, right? 14 and 15-year-olds should be focused on school, right? But then again, it also seems this administration doesn't quite care about education or the future of our children, right? So in a way, he's acknowledging, at least this is a positive for the immigrant community, he's acknowledging that US adult workers are not willing to perform these jobs. So much so that now we now have to replace these jobs that are traditionally held by foreign workers to do things like agricultural work by child labor, right, which is unlawful. So again, another area where immigrants play a vital role, right, in our community, in our economy, and here's DeSantis, right, underplaying their importance.
Right.
Any comments?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I mean, definitely agree with all of that, Yoli. And I guess passing the next question, this kind of ties into what Yoli was saying to attorney Manny here. Yoli mentioned that these workers, these that we're talking about, these 14-year-olds, are very young. They should be in school. And this would be the generation alpha. So, from your knowledge, what can you say about this generation and how what it would look like putting them into these jobs?
Well, I mean, they cannot force them to go into the job. So you willingly have to go and apply for the jobs.
Good
And I
point.
highly doubt that the TikTok generation and Instagram generation will be willing to go into the field to pick up crops or to do these kind of jobs, as
Mhm.
it's already difficult to find adults that wants to do this type of work.
So, we've recently heard that the IRS is going to start sharing data with the Department of Homeland Security. Initially, the IRS has never agreed to share any sort of information regarding individuals because of privacy laws. But the IRS is now close to finalizing data sharing agreements, and this is very concerning. This has brought a lot of questions. So, let's start with this. Do immigrants file taxes?
Not only do immigrants file taxes, immigrants file or pay the majority of the taxes in this country. Just in 2022, and this is the facts that I know of, undocumented immigrants specifically, or there's a difference. There's documented immigrants and undocumented immigrants. But undocumented immigrants paid 96.7 billion in federal, state, and local taxes. In Florida alone, over $1 billion in state taxes. You want to know who did not pay a single dollar in taxes in just 2024? Tesla, which reported $2.3 billion in revenue. So it's interesting that the IRS is actually even considering this when it is targeting the majority of the population that keeps the agency afloat. It's mind-boggling to me.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, now that we're talking about immigrants paying taxes, how do immigrants pay taxes? A lot of individuals believe they don't because they don't have a social security number or legal status here. But there is such thing as an I-10. Manny, can you share a little bit about what an I-10 is?
So an ITIN is a tax contributor number that allows anyone that have made any income in the United States to report it to the IRS. And typically what happens is when, corporations have IT numbers, people can get their own IT numbers. If you have your own work, like a sole proprietor, you will have an IT number, and you're not required to have a legal status in the country, because the law says that any income earned, it has to be reported to the IRS. So all you have to do is just request it from the IRS, and then if you ever become legalized, then your social security will be matched to that IT number to ensure that you get all the credits for all the tax years that you have paid. And that's why we always tell people, like, pay your taxes, because if you become legal, you will get those quarter credited to you based on your tax ID. But now it's a little bit cautious of telling people to pay their taxes if the IRS and the government intends to go after them.
Yeah, and then just to consider, right, for a lot of immigration benefits, you have to show that you're a person of good moral character. And a lot of that determination comes from whether you pay taxes or not, right? And the IRS has traditionally always incentivized undocumented immigrants, I mean, everybody to file income taxes. So this agreement is one particularly problematic, right? Because this is an agency that has always incentivized immigrants to file taxes, but also, I mean, it violates just numerous security laws, right, and disclosure laws. They're not legally allowed as an agency to disclose taxpayer information. So how they're going to go around this requirement is questionable. So it's likely that this probably won't work, and perhaps it's just a way to scare the immigrant community, right, into just going home. But I don't see how legally this type of agreement will work.
And also, let's remember that when the state of New York wanted Trump taxes,
Mm.
he was opposed and he fought it tooth and nail. And the IRS was not obligated to release his tax information despite of all the legal battle that went on. So, I really hope that the IRS continue to guard our tax information zealously as it has been in the past, and this doesn't turn into something worse.
Mhm.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And yeah, as of today, this is all just talk from sources in, both the Department of Homeland Security and the IRS, but these agencies independently have not released statements regarding this or any memo that we know of. So we will continue to monitor and keep everybody updated on that. Uh, Now, as of this week, Trump revoked protections for Cubans, Haitians, Venezuelans, and Nicaraguans. Can we talk a little bit about that? Exactly who are these individuals? How did they enter? What is this program? And what does this mean?
So the migrants that are impacted by this program are those that entered the process known as the I-134A Humanitarian Parole Program. That includes countries of Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Haiti. So there's about 530 migrants that were brought here into the U.S. under that Biden sponsorship program. So those are the ones that we know, factually based on the memo, will be impacted. So their paroles have since, as of March 25th, have been revoked. And what that means is if your parole or if your proof of lawful entry was revoked, essentially, right, the US government can now move to deport you based on your unlawful presence in the US.
Yeah, and to my understanding, there are around 530,000 individuals that will be impacted by this program that the Biden administration put into place. Now, there's a lot of questions regarding this, and maybe you and Attorney Manny can also help us all understand. Uh, a lot of Cubans, for example, when they come to the US, travel to the US, and they're here for a period of a year and 1 day, they can apply for adjustment of status. Can Cubans who entered with this parole adjust once they do reach the year?
So traditionally, right, under the Cuban Adjustment Act, a Cuban national who enters the U.S. lawfully with parole or with inspection can apply for residency after a year and 1 day. Since initiating the program, Cubans have entered on the CHNMV program were able to adjust based on their parole status. It is unknown, right, currently whether those applications that are pending based on this type of parole will be adjudicated or not. We do know that they have been frozen. Whether they will be adjudicated, that is unclear. But in essence, right, revocation means that if the parole has been revoked, then you don't have a lawful entry, right? And so just based on that specific humanitarian parole program, they will not be able to adjust. What we don't know is whether this will extend to other types of paroles, right? So there's the paroles that were given through the humanitarian parole program, and there's paroles that are usually given at the border, right? So if you entered the U.S. at a port of entry and you were paroled at the port of entry or using the CBP-1 app, for example, right? It's not clear really whether this will also apply to those types of paroles.
Yeah, I think the administration is being purposely vague to create uncertainty. And right now, like, none of the government sources have any clear information as to what's going on.
Yeah, it's important for us as attorneys. We're also receiving this information in real time, just like everybody else. There's very little guidance, right, from the government agencies. A lot of these decisions are made unilaterally without anybody else's consent or opinions. So we have the officers that are on the field, and they have no idea what's happening either. They're also just receiving this information in real time. And as of right now, I know that Manny has had some cases where the officers refuse to adjudicate green card applications based on this type of parole. And this is mostly because they don't really understand, right, how to apply these new regulatory changes, right? So we just have to, kind of be on alert, stay informed, and as more information comes out, we'll kind of talk about it and discuss it during our social media accounts. But as of right now, we know that the 530,000 affected are those that entered through the CHNB program.
And of those individuals, aside from Cubans, the Venezuelans, Nicaraguans, Haitians, and including Cubans, is there another pathway that they can take? Is there any other form of relief they can apply for now that they are in the U.S. and have no status?
So certainly if they are eligible and they can demonstrate a fear of persecution or torture, if they were returned to their home countries, they could apply for asylum. Okay. If you're married to a U.S. citizen, you can go the traditional route of filing and a marriage-based petition and then a provisional waiver of unlawful presence. Okay. If the issue is a lawful entry, right, and you can no longer adjust, that is another option to legalize based on marriage to a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident.
Yes, that is correct. You can certainly do that. But I know we're gonna talk about it at some point. But also there is the issue with the travel ban. So that's definitely gonna have an effect because some of these countries that we're talking about, they are being considered to be put on the travel ban, like
Mhm.
Cuba, Venezuela, and Haiti. So I mean, we can either talk about. I guess we're gonna talk about it next, but that is something that is gonna have an impact as well.
For sure. And, also, this is why it's so important to just consult with an immigration attorney because there's other specialty types of visas too, right? So if you've been here and you've been a victim of a crime, for example, it has to be a qualifying crime, you may be eligible for a visa based on being a victim of a crime. If you've been a victim of a severe form of trafficking, whether it's sexual or labor, you may also be eligible for a special type of visa, right? So this may not be the end for you, but you do have to be informed. And the only way to do that is really to consult with an immigration attorney.
And well, I mean, attorney Manny segued into the travel ban, so let's talk about it. The Trump administration is finishing up a travel ban that would prohibit certain individuals from a list of countries to enter the U.S. We've heard from sources like the New York Times that lots of different news outlets and reporters of possible countries. There's a potential list of 43 countries. However, nothing has been confirmed by the actual administration. Let's talk about we touched base a little bit on the certain countries that could be banned. What other countries are on this list of 43 countries that could potentially be banned?
That I know of just off the bat, like Afghanistan, Iran, Syria. You mentioned Cuba, North Korea, Haiti, right?
Yeah.
South Sudan,
Sudan.
Pakistan, right? We get a lot of immigrants from
Mm-hmm.
Pakistan.
So Cameroon, Liberia, the list goes on.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's kind of surprising, right? These are countries that were not initially included in Trump's first travel ban during his first administration. So it's interesting to see the inclusion. I mean, like Haiti to me was a surprise to have Haiti included in there. I mean, the U.S. embassy is already shut in Haiti, right? So we're having difficulty getting family members into the U.S. because we can't get consular appointments for them, right? So they've been stuck for over a year waiting consular appointments, and now they may be subject to this ban, right? So that was a little surprising to me. I mean, amongst other countries as well.
Right. And what is the purpose of this travel ban? What is the administration trying where is the administration trying to go with this?
So they claim that it's national security. Okay, and I'm looking at the list here, and there are countries here that you'll be like, what Dominica have to do with this? Like, how about Saint Lucia and
Right.
and countries
Right.
like this? But I guess someone was telling me that it had to do with the fact that some of these countries you could buy a citizenship and you could buy a passport from this. You can get like a national. You can be a Saint Lucia national like by buying into it, and people that are from countries that are probably banned already or they are high risk, they may buy those citizenship and use those passports to come to the United States as a back door. I guess that's why they probably are there. But you know, you have Cambodia, Cape Verde, and those things, and I'm like, I hope there is a rhyme or reason why those countries are in there.
But also, you can now buy U.S. citizenship for $5 million.
Yes,
So,
Yeah.
you
But
know,
you have to have $5 million.
concerns, right? Where you can just buy citizenship. They reduced the level of scrutiny, right, specifically for this type of visa. So, this seems very hypocritical and contradictory to me.
it is. It is. But you know, I guess it's throw everything and see what stick.
See what sticks. It's the same thing that happened with his first travel ban.
Yeah.
He went through numerous drafts until one was finally decided on being okay. So I think important to know is, again, this is not official. This was a leaked document, right? The official document would be completely different to this. But just to highlight kind of what the leaked document really means, right? So there are certain countries that it would be divided into, there's 43 countries. They would be divided into three categories, either red, orange, or yellow. Red meaning full visa suspensions, yellow, orange meaning partial suspensions, and yellow probatory periods. So full visa suspensions would mean, right, anybody who's applying for any sort of non-immigrant visa or even some immigrant visas would not be allowed to travel to the U.S. for any purpose. It's unclear whether if it's a spousal visas will meet some sort of exemption. We don't know that yet. They may or may not, right? Partial visa suspensions, again, could affect tourists, students, or any other immigrant visas, and exceptions will also apply. And then the probatory period, which is the yellow one, it's basically giving these countries an opportunity to comply with any requirements for improvement in terms of the information they provide to the U.S.
So, with that being said, you know, if you are a national from one of those countries, we strongly, strongly do not recommend you to travel outside of the country because if right now nothing had happened, but if you are outside of the country and you are from one of those nationality, you are very likely to get stuck and not be able to return unless something else changes. So that's why we strongly recommend people not to travel, especially if you are in this category.
Absolutely. Yeah, we know from the first travel ban that lawful permanent residents and U.S. citizens alike were stuck outside of the U.S.
Right. Yeah. And what about the individuals that are in the US from these countries once this travel ban goes into effect, such as international students, student visas, anyone who entered with any sort of visa that are already here?
So the leaked document seems to imply that even if you're in the U.S., you can have your visa revoked, right? If you come from one of these countries.
And there's we saw from the last time Trump was in office, all the protests, all the chaos that erupted. Is this expected again, the lawsuits?
Yes, absolutely. We previously discussed the revocation of the humanitarian paroles that is actually already being litigated in court. A petition was filed with the district court in Boston, and there's a hearing scheduled for April 6th, which will determine if an injunction is necessary. So, as with many of these regulatory changes proposed by Trump, a lot of them have already been appealed or will continue to be appealed in court.
And with that being said, too, if you are a student and you're thinking about protesting, don't. So here in Boston, there have been incident where a student have been detained, their visa has been revoked, and ICE have taken custody of them. It just happened last week at Tufts University,
I saw.
and it's something that is not. So if you are a student here on a visa and you're thinking about protesting, don't. Also, clean up your Facebook, your social media, and make sure that nothing political or nothing that could be subjective you have because they are looking into social media. And when you are coming into the country, they are looking at your phones and your computer. So these are the new times.
Yeah.
Really good
Was
point.
it the student that was arrested in front of her apartment, a PhD
Yeah.
student? Yeah,
Yes.
I saw the videos. It was viral on social media, and I don't know how I feel about this because the officers approach her clothes in regular clothing. They're not, ICE arrests have been like this. They're not wearing uniform, and they essentially, yeah, they don't read you any rights that I heard of, right? I didn't,
Just
at least
seemed
in the videos.
from the video, it just seemed that a plainclothes officer approached her kind of to corner her. And
Yeah.
then once he saw the other officer approaching her, then that's when they took out their badge, right, to show her, "Oh, we're working for ICE." But again, it was done very sketchy, right? And the purpose was to
Yes.
scare her into submission, right? There was no warning. There was no, again, usually for an arrest, right, you need to have probable cause. They weren't advising her of any of her rights or the reasons for her detention. So just if it's like a lot of our, her constitutional rights were definitely violated during this seizure. But, those are things that will be considered during her proceedings, right? The unlawfulness of that seizure that hopefully will help her in her release.
So speaking of changes and a lot of things going on, the White House released a memo. And basically, as Attorney Yolanda put it, President Trump declared war on immigration attorneys. The White House released this memo I'm seeing here on March 22nd, and it's titled Preventing Abuses of the Legal System and the Federal Court, which essentially is aimed at addressing misconduct by lawyers and law firms, specifically in the immigration realm. So let's talk about this a little further. What allegations of misconduct are being made? What is this memo referring to?
I mean, the memo, in short, is ordering sanctions and reviews and stricter oversight. So it's using the Department of Justice to weaponize essentially their control over immigration attorneys. And it's alleging, or presumably, that there are immigration attorneys, right, generalizing that the entire field apparently is committing fraud, right, and filing their clients' applications, whether it's asylum or VAWA. Okay. Obviously, you don't have to read too much within the lines to know that this is clearly an attempt to dissuade and scare immigration attorneys from exercising due process on behalf of their clients and representing some of the most vulnerable population here in the U.S., right? Unlike criminal defendants, immigrants do not have a right to counsel, right? This memo is specifically targeting big law firms that do pro bono work, right? Because it is the big law firms that have the funds to be able to represent this indigent community that would not be able to represent themselves, okay? Obviously, immigration attorneys, like most attorneys, take an oath, right, to uphold the Constitution, to conduct ourselves with integrity and civility, and to zealously represent our clients, right, while faithfully discharging our duties as officers of the court. So to make an assumption that immigration attorneys are acting improperly in our efforts to defend our clients is not only extremely dangerous, but unfounded, right? No other legal profession has ever been vilified or harassed or attacked in this way, right? This is clearly a rhetoric that this administration is trying to, dissuade into the populace, right? To make people believe that immigrants and immigrant attorneys are committing massive fraud, right? This is unfounded. There's absolutely no factual basis for this.
No, there isn't. It's just scare tactic, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, like like any profession, there may be few bad apples, but most of the immigration attorneys, if not, the majority of immigration attorneys, they are doing good work, and they are being ethic in the profession. and being all honest and responsible. So it's just an attack on the profession, which we have never seen that before from any other government.
No, I mean, I just think about just how tirelessly we work, right, on a day to day. And, compared to other legal professionals, we represent, we represent the class of people that cannot afford to pay, right? But we still work for them tirelessly to make sure that those that are deserving get an opportunity to stay here, right? I mean, if we're talking about attorneys that commit fraud, right? Let's talk about the tax code, right? Which has been unchanged for centuries for a very specific reason, right? Because it only benefits the wealthy, right? So here we are as a profession benefiting and representing a vulnerable population, and we're being attacked, right? And sought out by an administration that has never been seen before. So it's, obviously I'm very passionate about this because this is my profession and I take this very seriously. And it's just unheard of. And I feel personally attacked by this.
Me too, definitely. Definitely. But we'll keep fighting the good fight.
Yeah. I mean, we're not
Yeah.
standing down, right? That's the thing. Like if the Trump
Yeah.
presidency thought that this memo would scare us into submission, no, it has empowered us for sure.
I know Yoli can speak for Ayla. She's very involved with Ayla, and Ayla released a memo stating that, they were not going to allow this to dictate right the way that they proceeded with zealously defending their clients. I think that's really empowering.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, Ayla, there's a reason why a lot of immigration attorneys are members of Ayla, right? They, as an organization, represent all of us, right, on a nationwide level. And obviously, we uphold the same values as attorneys. And, I really appreciated that they released a statement, obviously denying any of this as true, right? And speaking on who their members are and how ethical their members actually are. Again, we all take an oath, right? To do this in court, to represent our clients and not present frivolous applications. So to make the assumptions that we are doing that, right, that we're actually going against our oath, that we're being unethical, that's just such a huge, broad overgeneralization that is so unfounded, in fact.
Well, this will definitely impact legal. Well, do you guys think this will impact legal representation for immigrants?
I don't think so. People are gonna keep going. But this is the irony, though. The irony is that they're not going after notarios, who are the worst.
The ones
They are the ones who,
submitting the frivolous, they're the ones.
Fraud. Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's such a good point, Manny, because
That's a great point.
also report a lot of these notarios, and our attorney generals do nothing about it, right? Nothing about it. Their doors continue to be open, and they not only commit fraud, but they make, sometimes life-changing mistakes on these, the non-immigrants applications that cause them and, it will cause them to go into removal proceedings or be deported. Right. So yes, why are they not going after them? But, again, going after the profession that works so tirelessly to make sure that these people are adequately represented.
I think the sentiment among attorneys is that, I'm not doing anything wrong. I don't have anything to fear. I'll just continue doing what I'm doing.
Yes, that is the general consensus.
As it should be. How, I don't understand how they could just release a memo and basically say, you should just not do your job because we think you're committing fraud and we're gonna fine you and we're going to, that's not okay. So due process concerns. There have been lots of due process concerns with the expedited removal policy. As we know, the Trump administration's agenda has allowed for individuals that have been here for less than 2 years to face expedited removals. What does this mean? Well, let's start off. Lots of people don't know what is an expedited removal.
So it's a process that essentially allows the U.S. government to deport someone quickly without a full hearing before an immigration judge. Right? Generally, these people are usually here without authorization or they've committed fraud. Right? So we see this a lot at the borders, right? Ports of entries with like B1, B2 entrants or F1 students who were previously in the US and there's proof or evidence that they worked without authorization. Right? So there's usually some sort of evidence either in their phone or maybe they filed taxes, right, unknowingly, and Customs and Border Patrol can see, right, that they worked unlawfully. So those people will have their visas revoked and expeditiously removed back home, right, to wherever they came from without being able to return for a period of usually 5 years. Okay. There is an exception, right? An exception is they cannot remove you if you express a fear of persecution or torture, right? If you were returned back to your home country, in that case, you would have a right to see a judge, right? And pursue an asylum claim.
And what is the common practice with expedited removals? Because typically, right, individuals are not just removed expeditedly. Everyone has due process. Even criminals, but they're referring to immigrants as criminals as well, have due process. So what is a common practice with expedited removal? What's different from the policy Trump is trying to enforce versus common practice?
So common practice is, right, these people are usually apprehended either without authorization, or they've been physically present in the US without authorization, or they committed some sort of fraud or misrepresentation. Because of that, right, they are subject to expedited removal. Generally, it happens in one day, okay, and they don't need to see a judge. That's how it works. Traditionally, it only applied to those who were apprehended or encountered within 2 weeks of their arrival and within 100 miles of the US borders. But Trump expanded this to include those who are encountered within 2 years of their arrival. Right? So this goes hand in hand with the revocation of the humanitarian parole. Why? Because the humanitarian parole was issued for 2 years. Right? So if all of a sudden your parole is revoked, you're now here without authorization, without status, and therefore subject to expedited removal.
Correct.
So let's say hypothetical, I flew into from a foreign country with a visitor's visa, flew into Kansas City within the last 2 years, overstayed my visa. Can I be subject to expedited removal?
Yes. Yeah. So as a matter of fact, those are prime target because the government already know where they are, and they already know that they overstay their time of being here.
Yeah. We've heard as practitioners in our listservs of attorneys, examples of foreign nationals who have gone to immigration offices for marriage interviews or for green card interviews that are overstays, and they have been apprehended, right, based on their overstay. That was unheard of before, because generally, if you're going into USCIS for some sort of marriage interview or an adjustment of status interview, you're eligible for relief, right? There is a way for you to lawfully stay here as a lawful permanent resident, but not now. Now you're also a target because you're a visa overstay.
That is true.
Speaking of USCIS, we saw that happen here in Miami. I believe the Miami office, Yolanda shared that with us. In the Miami office, they arrested a few individuals, and the fact that USCIS is posting about this was very concerning within itself.
Yes,
Very
and
problematic, right? Yes, go ahead, Manny.
no, it's happened in New Orleans,
Yeah.
and it happened in other part of the country. And the Facebook post is always says, keeping Trump promise of keeping America safe or whatever. And
Yeah.
it just like
It's
annoying.
very problematic because USCIS, unlike ICE, is not an enforcement branch, right? Their job is not to enforce removal. Their job is to adjudicate applications. So, them cooperating with ICE to detain people who are eligible for relief that is, I mean, obviously scary and just incredibly problematic.
Now we have clients that, are fearful of going to their very own adjustment interviews because of this. So, speaking of USCIS, USCIS recently issued a policy to issue more NTAs. As of February 28th, I'm seeing here, there is a policy memorandum expanding its authority to issue notices to appear in cases involving inadmissible and removable non citizens, including those whose immigration benefit requests are denied or who are no longer in lawful status. So kind of what we were talking about, but except being detained, they can issue NTA. So what is an NTA?
So an NTA is a notice to appear. Okay? It's essentially the charging document that the government will issue against you with allegations as to why you are removable or deportable from the United States. The NTA must contain, right, your name, your address, date of birth, and information as to your alienage. Okay. It must also contain the charge of removability under our Immigration and Nationality Act, okay, which is our immigration code, as to why you are deemed removable. Okay. So that document is the only document that can establish whether you are subject to removal from the United States.
And when can USCIS issue an NTA now as of this new memorandum? And how does this process work? Who will it affect?
Well, it's very unclear. It gives the presumption that if they deny you benefits, they can technically give you an NTA right there. It's very like broad.
Yeah, I mean, it allows kind of unfettered powers and discretion, right, to officers to make this determination, right? Whereas before, unless you were clearly deportable, right, they had discretion and were actually disincentivized from issuing NTAs because, as we know, our immigration court system is overwhelmed with cases, where we have a backlog of over 3 million cases pending in the immigration court system. So to now add to that backlog, right, based on issuing all of these notices to appear, just seems like we're never getting rid of this, or we're never getting rid of these cases that are on the backlog. It's kind of unclear how they're hoping to manage all of these removal cases, especially as Trump recently fired 20 immigration judges from the bench.
Definitely something that we have been seeing more of, and like you guys previously mentioned, USCIS is a agency. It's not an enforcement agency, right? So then to refer these individuals to removal proceedings, it plays a lot into that as well. So we have a lot of frequently asked questions from our clients, individuals on our social media platforms that we want to address. These are just random topics or specific questions. So here we have, can I have more than one immigration case open at the same time?
So the short answer is yes. Okay, there is no limit to how many types of cases you can have pending. Obviously, if there's a case that contradicts another case, probably not. But, for example, you can have both an asylum case and a marriage case, right, pending at the same time, or an asylum case and temporary protective status, right? Usually those do go hand in hand. Similarly, you can have a marriage case and also an employment-based petition pending at the same time. So, if you're eligible for more than one benefit, absolutely apply for all the benefits that you're eligible for.
Definitely. I agree.
Beautiful. And now, speaking of immigration cases, here we have a specific kind of immigration case, which is an I-130 family for a petition for a family member. Do these petitions, once approved, expire?
So they don't expire, okay? And I think Manny can speak a little bit more to this issue, okay? They don't expire. However, if the case is at the consular processing stage, okay, so this means that if you are consular processing your case from your home embassy because you're either not eligible for adjustment of status in the US or that's the route that you're going to take, the I-130 petition could actually be terminated if you let a certain period of time pass. Okay, so for the National Visa Center or NVC, if you don't contact them within a period of 1 year to demonstrate your continued interest in immigrating, they could terminate or essentially destroy the I-130. Okay, which means you have to start from the very beginning. Okay, but if you file an I-130 and it's approved, and let's say you just forget about it, right? That doesn't necessarily expire. You can use that to immigrate down the line. There's a specific consideration as well in terms of how many times you can use the same I-130. And I think hopefully, Manny, you can speak a little bit more to that because that always confuses me.
Well, it is really confusing, but my understanding is if they have issue a major decision on the case pertaining to I-130, then if it has been used, it cannot be reused again. How to add to your answer as well, so if the relationship in which the I-130 was based on terminates, that also terminates the I-130, which also means usually with obviously with parents and children, they're always going to be parents and children, but with the spouses, if they separate and divorce, then the I-130 it's gone.
Right.
And the with other family member, if that person dies, then that terminates the I-130, and you will need to do a different type of process to try to get it back on the system. But that's pretty much to the answer of the I-130s.
Wonderful. And let's see here. So with most I-130s, if you are eligible after that for adjustment, to adjust, you need a sponsor. Right? So we have lots of individuals asking, what do I need to become a sponsor for the I-864?
I will let Manny answer this because he's the guru of affidavit of support. He actually spoke on this at the AILA National
Oh, wow.
Conference. So we will open the
Amazing.
door for you, Manny.
So first of all, you need to have a legal status to be a sponsor. You can have a lawful permanent resident or a U.S. citizen, or being here under a legal status. The income that you have earned, it has to be income with authorization. What that means, you need to have a work authorization to be able to use that particular income. And everything is based on the poverty guidelines. The USCIS have set a table of guidelines that based on the dependents that you claim and your total income, it will determine how much money you need to have made to be able to sponsor a particular individual or a particular family. So that's a calculation that is done. In some instances, if your income is not enough, your assets can be pledged, such as equity in your house and bank account, money in your bank account, your savings and checking, that can be pledged towards it. But that is something that is on case by case basis depending on the income.
And what happens if I don't meet that income requirement and I am the petitioning individual?
You can get a joint sponsor, which means that a family member or a friend can step in and be the joint sponsor. So when you are a sponsor for someone, that has a legal consequence. Right now, Trump has not enforced because it's a legal contract. Being a joint sponsor is a legal contract, and right now, not much have been done about that. But if you are planning to be a joint sponsor for someone, you should probably know your rights and responsibility because those often survive divorce as well. So
Mhm.
it's important to know what you're getting yourself into.
Yeah, because if there is a divorce, in the case that there is a divorce and it gets ugly, technically that person can uh, file a lawsuit or obtain alimony, right? Based off of that contract that was signed.
Yes, depending on the state law on that particular state, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that can be problematic for sure.
Yeah, it can be problematic. So yeah. And our final question, is it safe to travel within the US if I have employment authorization card or a work permit and a driver's license?
So it may be safe to travel now, but after the 5th of May, when the Real ID goes into effect, it may not be. So after May 5th, all travelers traveling domestically will need to have Real ID compliant documentation in order to board any domestic flight. And as far as I know, a work authorization document may not satisfy that.
What about a state issued driver's license? Do the state issued driver's license that they provide under, the category of having an employment authorization card, are those considered real IDs?
So it has to have a star, right? I think the driver's license only that have the star will satisfy that requirement. I don't know what they look like in all of the states. There's, on the Department of Homeland Security's website, they give some examples
It's
of what
like a
that's.
regular license, but
Yeah.
it just have a
The
star.
license if it has a star, exactly. It must have the star. It's usually
Understand.
located in the top right-hand corner.
So in Massachusetts, if you have a work authorization, they will give you a real ID, but only for the validity of that work authorization,
Mm-hmm.
which means that you can use it to travel, but when expired, you need to provide proof that you continue having a lawful status here to be able to renew it.
I believe it's the same here in Florida, right?
Yeah, it's the exact same. I mean, so the driver's license will usually be issued only as long as the actual authorization document is valid for.
Which, speaking of, I recently got a question from a client. She entered the US under the Biden parole program, and she has her work authorization under the category for that program. However, the paroles were revoked as of this week. So she posed the question, is my work authorization still valid? Even though it doesn't expire until 2026, I believe. However, that status has been revoked.
Technically, it's no longer valid, right? Because the basis for the work authorization has been revoked. So I think, the government will advise her that it's no longer valid, but, it's still a valid document, right, on its face. But yes, unfortunately, technically, it means that it's not a valid EAD
That
anymore.
it's no longer valid. Got it. Well, that's the end of our questions, and just a few news sources here. The Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, appears to be on commercials on Univision, and there's a lot of controversy going on because of that. Have you guys heard of that?
I actually have not.
I
No?
have not, but I have listened to Pandora ads and
With Trump administration ads?
yes, telling people to leave.
Yeah. So, according to Univision, there's lots of reporters on Univision. There's lots of controversy going on right now because they agreed and they reached an agreement with the Trump administration to run these ads, where essentially they're being warned to leave the country. And as we know, Univision is a platform that is used by mainly the Latino community, right? So it's just brought a lot of controversy. I found it really interesting. And then Christine, did you guys see Christine Noam visiting El Salvador and the ad that they ran with her and all the Yoli knows what I'm talking about.
Their propaganda, and
Propaganda.
it's
Yeah.
just, it's propaganda at its finest, right? And it's fear
Yes.
mongering. It's just trying to, scare people into submission. That's what we're seeing now. And, she specifically did El Salvador because that's where That's the only country that's kind of accepted, right, to receive immigrants from other third countries for a fee. Okay. So I think that's why she was there specifically in that country.
Lots of propaganda. We've been seeing lots of commercials, lots of ads being run by the Trump administration with these warnings. So yeah, lots of fear mongering. Well, we're reaching the end of our time together. Thank you so much. I'm gonna open up the floor to you two if you want to end on any final notes before we wrap up. And thank you so much for your time, for your legal advice.
You're welcome
Um,
anytime.
and I'm thanks, Manny, for joining us. And I'm really happy that I could take some time out, carve some time out of our busy days to be here and address some of these concerns. I know it's really important. So yeah, it just, for all of you guys watching, I hope you've made it this far. But if you have, again, we can't stress the importance of just, having an initial consultation and just being informed, right? The information is the most important tool we can have going forward.
Definitely. And just stay positive and keep the good attitude and the hopes, and don't buy into the media frenzy, and get your news from the right source. And all the information, always, we're here for you. Just give us a call for a consultation.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye.
All set. Thanks, Manny, so much, really,
Okay,
for joining.
awesome. Thank you so much, Manny.